1. This story happened quite some time ago. I have never tried to seek out revenge before, but the way these people treated me and my family was utterly repulsive. And so here we have my first ever, and hopefully last, revenge story. First, the setup. My family lived in a house that was owned by, according to one of my family members, let's call her Mary, benevolent landlords. After they had lived there for 2 years on lease, the lease expired, and so they started living there on a month-to-month basis. Mary's husband, let's call him John, suggested that they renew their lease, but Mary, being convinced that they had established a relationship of trust with the landlords, insisted that there was no need to do so. This was the first mistake. Sometime later there was a storm that knocked over a relatively flimsy and frankly hideous chain-link fence that was built around the house. Now, because Mary and John kept important things in their yard, they needed a fence. The landlords were looking around for contractors to rebuild the fence, but John had an idea that he felt would be beneficial for all. See, John and Mary really loved this house, and they were hoping someday to buy it off the landlords, something that the landlords had suggested as a possibility from time to time. John suggested that he build the fence instead. He would only charge for the materials required, and he would provide the labor at no cost under one important condition. The landlords must promise that they had no intention of selling the house. One landlord, we'll call him Benny, not only promised John that the house wouldn't be sold anytime soon, but even went as far as saying that they would only ever consider selling the house to John and Mary, and so a deal was made. John would rebuild the fence, more beautiful than it had ever been, and Benny and the other landlord would ensure that John and Mary would get to keep living in that house, enjoying the fruits of their labor until the day the landlords finally decided to sell the house to them. John and Benny agreed upon what the dimensions and material of the fence would be. They decided wood, and they decided on the fence being fairly tall. John bought the materials and Benny paid John for the expenses. Halfway through building the fence, John asked Benny about whether he wanted certain changes in the backyard that would, alongside the fence, only serve to make the land value skyrocket. Benny said he would love said changes. The next part is important. John looked Benny in the eye and said, in no unclear terms, "If you have any intention of selling this house to someone other than us, tell me now and I will stop this entire project. I am only interested in building this under the condition that I will get to enjoy it." Benny responded, equally clearly, "You and your family will get to enjoy this home indefinitely. Feel at ease to do whatever you want with this yard." And so the fence was finished, and it was beautiful. This is the part where I come in. I came to visit my family, and I helped them finish the fence and clean up the yard. I wasn't particularly happy with the terms of this agreement, but there was nothing that could be done now. Now here comes the part where my family gets fucked. Hard. Not so much as a week after the fence had been built, Mary gets a call from the other landlord, let's call her Jane. Jane tells Mary that something unexpected has occurred. See, her niece is currently on the market for a house, and she really wanted to see this particular house. Mary, who can feel herself getting riled, asks Jane how this could be. The fence was only just finished, and they're considering selling the house. Jane assures Mary that her niece will most likely not want the house, but that she has to let her see it. Very well. Now, I am not sure about the details that happened shortly after, but it seems that Jane's niece didn't like the given price of the house, which was now more valuable than it was before, and so she chose not to buy. Bullet dodged, right? If only. Benny came to visit John and Mary with something they had always wanted. Suddenly, the landlords wanted to sell, and an offer was made to my family. Now, my family is not wealthy, but they would have preferred to have been told well in advance of the intention to sell. Nonetheless, the offer that was presented was not unfair, and the family said yes. Excellent. Yet, as soon as my family was approved to purchase the house, Benny came back with a change. The landlords no longer wanted to sell the house at the original price. Instead, the price they had in mind now skyrocketed to roughly the same price as the most expensive house in the area, a price John and Mary could no longer afford, and certainly more than the house was actually worth. That's not the worst of it, though. Suddenly, the landlords needed to sell the house immediately. John said to Benny, "We had a deal." Benny responded that they suddenly needed the money because of some family member needs. Later on, the story changed to them no longer needing the money. Then it was Jane who needed the money because of some other piece of completely fabricated bullshit. The point was that they wanted to sell the house now to line their pockets, but they could never stick to a single excuse. Again, John told Benny that they had a deal. Benny's response, "I don't remember that. We never got anything in writing, and so we never had any deal." Jane later told me, "A verbal agreement doesn't mean shit." Unfortunately, in the eyes of the law, nothing could be proven. We couldn't force them to sell the house to my family at the original price, and we couldn't force them to let my family keep living there. All right, thought my family. We just want to get paid for the labor that we put into the fence then. This was not ideal, since they now needed to leave the home they had lived in for quite some time. But they knew it wasn't theirs, and they weren't going to put up a fight over it. At this point, they just wanted to get paid for their labor. Benny and Jane didn't want to pay. My family members needed that money, given that they were getting kicked out on such short notice. The money was needed in order to find a new place to live. Benny and Jane, however, insisted that they had always been fair with the rent, and that they simply didn't owe my family legally. I told Benny and Jane that we would just take things to court and have a judge decide. Given the fear of court, Benny and Jane decided that they would pay my family, but that the labor for this gargantuan monstrosity of a beautiful fence just wasn't worth much more than the materials it was made of. The labor couldn't possibly be that much, they reasoned. Also, they would only pay for the labor for the fence, not for the rest of the work that was done on the yard. Well, everyone decided to get an estimate. The average we got was $3,000 for the labor. Benny and Jane managed to get one estimate from one of their family members at $350. What a fucking joke. The day to leave arrived, and Benny and Jane paid my family far less than what the labor was actually worth. My family left. We lost so much. The effort that went into building this fence, with the intention of getting to enjoy having it, under the agreement that they would get to keep living there, just to have it taken away, and to barely even get paid for the labor. To get shit on by these two fuckwads. That was unacceptable to me. We couldn't win anymore, and I didn't want them to win either. So the revenge. I read up on fences. I learned far too much about what was and wasn't allowed when it came to fences. I memorized every rule. I learned when permits were and were not needed. I learned what the allowed dimensions were. I learned about whether fences needed finish. Oh boy, the things I learned about fences. I learned that you don't need a permit if your fence gets damaged, so long as you're rebuilding the exact same fence. But this was wood and the old one was chain link. I learned that the fence needed to be painted, but this one was not. I learned that the fence had a very specific height limit, which this fence violated. These people were so happy to stick to the letter of the law when it came to screwing over my family, so I decided that I, too, would stick to the letter of the law. Somehow, the county found out that this fence was permitless, unpainted, and far too tall. Shortly after the county found this out, Benny and Jane got a visit from the county right before they managed to sell the house at their obscene price. Wouldn't you know it? Their fence was built illegally. Now, sometimes you can just get a permit after the fact, but their fence wasn't allowed to be built the way it was. There were no plans, no inspection, nor anything else that the county required. It had to come down. My family got an angry call. The landlords accused my family of never getting a permit, something that my family literally could not do, given that this was not their property. Besides, it was the landlords who assumed no permit was needed, and my family knew nothing about how permits worked. So the fence had to be torn down. There goes the money they saved by not paying my family. And they lost our prospective buyer. There goes the money they wanted to make. And the land value of the house went down. There goes the price point they wanted to sell the house at. And they need to build a new fence, since no one will want to live in this house without some sort of fencing. Looks like they'll need to pay for a new fence, labor and all, from an actual contractor. We didn't win, but neither did they. Fuck you. 2. Trigger warning for anyone offended by crimes against potatoes, cheese, and cuisine in general. I have since attempted to atone for my sins by never treating food this poorly again. With that out of the way. Over a decade ago, I worked in a small independent pizzeria in the rural Midwest USA, as both a cook and nominally an assistant manager, which seemed to imply I had authority to bear the brunt of customer complaints, while also lacking the authority to do much about them, other than call for an actual manager. Even so, it was a pretty nice job, in no small part due to the fact that being a non-chain restaurant in a small town in the Corn Belt, most of our clientele was fairly nice and civil, or near insensate from being high on moonshine or some other recreational pharmaceutical after some hoedown or shindig, or both, since I've found the Venn diagram of chill folks and folks who are likely intoxicated by cannabis to contain not insignificant overlap. Now for a little background. This episode, I am to relate, took place during these Hassalon days when the Atkins diet was at its zenith. For those sane people outside the US or otherwise sheltered from it in a different manner, the Atkins diet was ostensibly a health plan to assist with weight loss by cutting out carbohydrates from one's diet. In reality, many, perhaps most of its practitioners, labored under the pretense that despite incredible intakes of high-fat and high-calorie foods, the avoidance of bread would somehow cause Mother Nature and her sons heart disease and malnutrition to go blind and forget about them for a while. Another point to note is that unlike some pizzerias, our pizza place served much more than just pizzas. Though pizza was the primary product on offer, we had a bunch of different sandwiches, steak, chicken, fish, etc., calzones, wings, various homemade breads, and French fries and other fried foods. With the onset of Atkins, our menu morphed to include such idiocies as breadless sandwiches, breadless pizzas, etc., which are too depressing to describe in detail. At the time of this incident, I had been working there for about a year and a half. It was a Friday, specifically the Friday after Thanksgiving. For non-USers or those not in the know, Thanksgiving is our pagan ritual where we offer sacrifices of food to the gods of gluttony and annoying relatives. Normally Fridays were rather busy, but because of the fact that every family had somewhere between a lot and infinite leftovers in their fridge from the day before, the restaurant was as dead as my sense of happiness after hearing Paul Reiser do stand-up one time. As such, I was the only one scheduled to work for the last 2 hours of the shift until closing. Much cleaning was done to fill the hours until midnight, when I could go home and play video games until sunrise like any self-respecting young person. Grease and dirt still sing mournful ballads of the terrible reckoning of that night. Anyway, having scrubbed the place to a shine, counted the till, and beat back the throng of customer, I found myself staring daggers at the seemingly time-locked punch clock with 15 minutes to go until midnight. I hate the jingle of bells on entrance doors to this day. In walked the couple, who I will call Mr. and Mrs. H for this story. Their actual last name began with H. They shared their surname with that of a portion of the name of a well-known band of motorcycle. But I also had to have some other less than flattering nicknames utilizing the letter for them, or at least for one of them. Mr. H was cool. He was this chill little scrawny guy who wore glasses roughly the thickness of a phone book folded twice, and was incredibly soft-spoken and polite. His one damning quality was a peculiar reluctance to wear anything but a thin and very nipple-revealing sleep shirt and boxer combo into the restaurant, despite whatever condition may pertain outside. Mrs. H, on the other hand, was a beast of a specimen. In many senses of the word, she was quite, robust in her stature and physique, towering over me, a not short guy, by at least a foot, 1/3 meter for the fancy metric inclined, and easily outstripping me in weight by somewhere around 200 pounds. I'm too lazy to look up the pound to kilo conversion, sorry. Lest this seem like simple body shaming, I should note that her lack of social grace was every bit commensurate to her size. She was rude, brusque, demanding, and generally unpleasant, in the way of all customers who come into a restaurant with the revealed, epiphanic knowledge that they are right, and by extension, the rest of the world is wrong.
5 cheese fries,
she said, spewing the words like a Victorian noble when telling a servant to clean up a dog's mess.
Extra cheese.
The door had barely had time to close behind her.
Yes, ma'am,
I said, wincing inwardly but hopeful to keep the interaction brief so I could usher them on their way. And would you like...
And make sure it's extra cheese this time. You duty heads never put on enough cheese.
I should mention here that she did not say the word duty heads, nor in fact any such mild swear replacement at any time. She had a habit that our manager called swear Tourette's, where her speech would be strangely punctuated by a wealth of rather inventive curse words, peppered throughout at about every third word, emerging from her uncouth throat hole. The behavior was tolerated and she wasn't banned from the restaurant because, though uncivil and rude, it did not come across as designedly hostile or attacking, since there was no non-hostile behavior she had to compare it against. It was her rest state, as it were, a background radiation and unpleasant aspect of her existence. The way tornadoes cause property destruction or Paul Reiser causes sadness. Also, everyone felt bad for her husband, who we knew would be deprived of our food as well if we banned her. And as I mentioned, he was rather chill and cool, nipple shirt notwithstanding. Yes, ma'am, I said, and knowing the order had only been for her, and anything for you, Mr. H?
No, thank you, he said, though I may get a soda before we...
And make sure not to put any of that toasted breadcrumb shit paste on it.
Note, she actually said shit paste, and though I loathe repeating too much unwholesome language here, I feel this one is novel enough to warrant it. She interrupted,
Where on Atkins?
This confused me for several reasons. First, while I was perfectly capable of making up breadcrumbs to put on whatever a customer desired, we didn't have them as a normal part of our cheese fries recipe. Secondly, to the best of my knowledge, then and now, French fries are not carb-free, thus casting doubt on the soundness of using them as a weight loss tool. Ma'am, I said, searching my mental vaults for a way to say it that didn't make it sound like she was stupid. You know that potatoes and French fries do contain carbs, right? If you're doing Atkins, we have a lot of other items that...
Look!
Creative expletive.
Just make the damn fries. I think I know more about healthy diet than you do.
It is my misfortune to have missed such an obvious truth, I suppose, and, as they say, the customer is always right. I obediently went to turn on the fryer, which I had turned off in my foolish assumption that no one would order 5 cheese fries less than 10 minutes before midnight the day after a major holiday, and put the fries on to cook. A substantial and overtime-inducing amount of time later, I loaded the French fries into a baking dish and proceeded to cover them with roughly double the amount of cheese as was normally served on them, and about 8 times the amount a human person should have in a whole week. When finished, I packaged them up and went to give them to Mrs. H.
Let me see 'em before we go. Make sure you put on enough cheese,
she said. I obligingly opened up one of the containers, and even more obligingly opened up the remaining 4 when she didn't trust that they would be equivalent to the already inspected one.
Not enough cheese, she said. Go and do 'em again.
At this point I had reached that nirvanic state where annoyance crossed the threshold and became an almost beatific equanimity, bolstered by the malicious understanding that my obedience completely undermined her fruitless and stupid diet. I went and did 'em again, this time piling on roughly 3 times the cheese I had used previously, resulting in a soupy mess of liquid cholesterol that would have instantly made every cardiologist in the world die from depression. Another inspection followed. The results were declared satisfactory, and the H's left without further ado, leaving me free to close up shop for good. I didn't know it then, but over the next few weeks the cheese fries order was to be placed several times per week by her, in the invincible ignorance of belief that it was Atkins approved. Several more weeks after that, After a time when the H's had failed to order anything from us, I was working alone again one night, when to my surprise in came Mr. H unencumbered by his wife. What's more, he came in to order just a baked fish platter, one of our healthiest menu items, and quite good for himself. When I asked him where his wife was, he informed me that she was no longer able to eat out for the foreseeable future. As it turns out, French fries were not carb-friendly. Furthermore, she had actually gained somewhere on the order of 25 pounds during her diet, and had a minor cardiac episode, and was restricted by her doctor from eating anything more unhealthy than raw vegetables and air for a long while. When she finally did come back in, much later, and many pounds lighter, I was even astounded to find that she thanked me after listening fully, intently, to my alternative suggestions for healthier menu items. Addressing some common questions and comments. 1. Our breadless sandwiches and pizzas were these sad little shells of foodstuffs, where the bread layer was a mixture of green vegetables and some sort of dairy substitute thing that had only heard of cows in myth and legend. The resulting glop was baked until it was a crispy patty loaf hybrid or pizza round, and then covered with sandwich and pizza toppings in an attempt to make it taste a little less like ass. This attempt was always unsuccessful. 2. I've had no personal interactions with Mr. Reiser. I just find him unfunny for the perfectly legitimate reason that he is to comedy what the Black Death is to human health and well-being. In some more malicious alternate reality, the despotic military state that has taken over the US has replaced waterboarding and thumbscrews with copies of Couplehood and Mad About You DVDs. 3. Some background information. Back when I was in high school, I took a standard physics class from a teacher, physics dick or PD, who liked to push his power around. This resulted in a lot of ridiculous rules. My favorite was the rule that a student had to spend at least 1 minute on each question in a test. If we turned a 40-question test in 39 minutes after PD handed it out, we'd be docked 20%. The policy was supposed to encourage us to be careful with our answers or some shit, but it frustrated me to no end. I had a pretty good mind for physics, so I always finished my test fairly quickly. I had to stare at a wall for 20+ minutes before I could turn my test in and bring out a book to read. Not a huge deal, but still annoying. Now, PD was not a great teacher, so the class usually had a lot of questions. One day, as we were reviewing for the year-end standardized test, he was trying to explain one of the review questions to the class. Without getting too deep into the semantics, he put the equation F equals ma on the board twice, and tried to convince us we would get 2 different answers using the same quantities for the variables, if we solved it in different orders. Naturally, I pushed back on this. After a few minutes of discussion, PD said in front of everybody, "You obviously don't understand physics as much as you think you do. I want you to start coming into the remedial sessions every Wednesday so I can fix that." So fuck that guy. I, the never skipped a class, goody two-shoes, people-pleasing human rug, stood up so fast my chair fell over and stormed out of the classroom. I didn't even have a hall pass, bless my soul. As I sobbed in a stall in the girls' bathroom, I hatched my plan for revenge. PD had a grading incentive for the year-end standardized test. If we scored above 85% and had no zeros on our assignments, we would get an A in the class. So it didn't matter if we were failing if we met both these criteria. He would kick us up to an A. A few days after the incident, I checked with PD to make sure 100% that I could qualify for the grade boost. "As long as you turn everything in, I don't care what's on your assignment. It's quantity I'm worried about, not quality." Sweet. For the rest of the term, I wrote my name carefully across the top of each of my assignments, worth 1 point, and turned them in blank. The first time I handed PD my paper, he looked at me with pure and unadulterated confusion. With a classic shit-eating grin, I said, "Quantity, not quality, right?" And I was right. He had to give me that 1 point for each assignment. Since he had also mandated that I attend his remedial sessions, I'd waltz in, write my name on the roll, and waltz right back out again. Test time came. PD was stressing over my lack of physics understanding, and tried with increasing panic to get me to do 1 assignment, or sit through just one review session. Nah. I knew my way around the subject matter already. I just sat in the back of the class and let him think I was an idiot. We walked into the computer lab for our standardized test, and PD snarked, "Good luck, you're going to need it." This was a 60-question test, which meant we had to take at least an hour doing it. For the first 10 minutes, I stared at the opening screen. PD walks by, I can feel his concern. 10 more minutes, he walks by again. "Is everything all right?" PD asks, "Just peachy." 45 minutes in, I could practically hear him sweating. He kept shooting me furtive looks from across the testing room. I clicked past the opening screen and got started on my test. 20 minutes later, I submit my answers and walk out of the room. I knew I aced that thing. For the next couple weeks, PD and I pointedly ignore each other. I keep checking my grade. One day, I see the F had switched to an A. He had gotten our grades back from the state, and apparently I had met his score cutoff. Naturally, I go to see him. "Hey, PD, I noticed you got the test scores back. How'd I do?"
"Well, you passed."
"Sweet. What did my score end up being?"
98%.
"Awesome. Where did that rank me?"
"Highest out of my classes."
"Wow. All those remedial sessions sure did pay off. Thank you." 4. At my work, I get orders from customer service, and I pack them up and ship them out. One of the products can be personalized by the customer. The software I use is designed so that I upload a file with the list of names to be printed. It can only be formatted one specific way, otherwise it just rejects the file. I receive the file via email from customer service. They get the names from a report received via the online website. When I was trained, I was told I should not edit or change the file I receive. Just use it exactly as it is. If it fails, then I was supposed to email it back to customer service and tell them it didn't work. So for a while I did that. But after one order took multiple attempts over the course of 2 weeks, emailing customer service again and again, "The file still doesn't work, please fix." I opened the file myself and took a look. Turned out it was a super simple fix. Customer service was consistently doing one of two mistakes. They were either emailing me the file they received from the website, completely wrong list format, or they were screwing up the completely simple task of copy-pasting the names into the right list format. So after that, I just started opening the files and fixing them myself. I would also email customer service to let them know I was fixing their mistakes. Usually just a screenshot of the original file versus the fixed file. I had hoped they would eventually remember my examples and stop making the same mistakes over and over. Nope. Instead, some weeks later my boss pulled me aside and told me that there were a few complaints that my tone was coming across as rude or snippy in my emails. And I could maybe try being a bit nicer. Also, the orders were taking too long. Could I explain why? Well, that made me pretty miffed. Since I had started fixing the errors myself, the fulfillment time went from 2 weeks to 2 to 3 days at most. My boss is awesome though, so she listened when I explained what I was supposed to do, versus what I had been doing, and showed her my emails. My boss then emailed the website manager and asked if the order file could be changed slightly to just match the format I needed to process the order. It seemed like a simple solution, so customer service wouldn't have to copy-paste the information into a second file. It was just a list of names. The report program's formatting could be changed if needed. The website manager huffed and grumped about it and clearly didn't want to bother with taking the time to make changes. They snidely insisted it was easier and faster if everyone would just do their jobs correctly to start with. Here's where the malicious compliance begins. My boss didn't have the pull to override the website manager, so she advised me to go back to doing it the way I was supposed to. Report every single failed file and do not fix it. She also told me to CC the website manager each time, since it was part of their department too. Last of all, dial up the sweetness in my emails. For about 1 week, customer service faithfully sent me the correct files. But then they started to drift again. When the first wrong file came in, I CC'd the manager and they completely fired back a screenshot and an irate reminder to everyone about the right file. The next one got a similar reaction. The third email got no response, nor any after that. In the silence that followed, the floodgates slowly creaked open, until almost every file from customer service had a problem with it again. Every email was faithfully CC'd to the website manager, with a screenshot of the failed file. Every fixed file that failed was also CC'd to website manager, with another screenshot of the file. It soon piled up to 12 emails a week, and some orders took 2 weeks to fill. Every email started with a hearty greeting and ended with a sincere thanks, and a wish for a happy, good and great day, afternoon, weekend, holiday, etc. I oozed pleasantness in every sentence. 3 months later, the process for personalized orders was suddenly and completely changed overnight. Apparently, the website manager got fed up and had my program changed so that it pulled the list of names from the website directly. Amusingly enough, it was very easy to implement. According to the IT guy that came by to show me the new changes, what had been a week-long process became something I could do in about 15 minutes. 5. I will preface this by saying that a couple years ago I worked for a medium-sized business in the US. About 40+ locations and wireless retail across one state. Not small enough to be small, but small enough to know the owner and having met him on a few occasions. I was one of the store managers for one of the retail locations. We recently got a new district manager, DM, who was an absolute tool. No people skills, no product knowledge, no sales skills. Basically, he got fired from another gig but had known the owner a long time, so he got the job. He frequently demanded employees do things outside the scope of their job, sometimes totally illegal, and clearly had no knowledge of state's labor laws despite being a district and region manager for the last 10 years or so. For these reasons, I ignored all of his calls to my cell and pretended like in-person conversations didn't happen. Store calls were recorded, but most of our communication was through text. About 2 months or so into his new position, he decides to institute a new rule that if any store doesn't hit its daily sales goals, regardless of how the month looks, they have to be on the 30-minute sales call the following morning at 8 a.m., even for employees that had the day off. For reference, our stores were open 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. When this rolled out, I reached out to him, all via text, explaining to him the labor burdens this would place on the store. 1, we were not issued company cell phones, so they could not legally require us to use them for business, especially when not working. So anyone who had the day off could legally avoid responding after our closing hours and sleep in past the call. Also, none of us were classified as on-call employees, so that's an accountability issue. 2, if an employee chose, since we are not obligated to use personal phones for work, they could simply choose to use the phone at the workplace. This is fine. But my state laws prohibit requiring breaks over 1 hour during shifts without employee consent. So a closer coming in at 10:30 could show up at 8 a.m. for the call and work until close. And now we have 2.5 hours of overtime per day per closing employee. 3, state law requires 2 hours paid labor for any forced, without employee consent, schedule changes not made at least 24 hours in advance. 4, state law requires that you pay any employee who shows up to work, no matter how long, unless they leave sick, etc., be paid for at least 2 hours of labor or half a day's normal shift, whichever is greater, 4 hours. The one exception is critical business meetings scheduled well in advance, 30+ days. So if you are off, you could come in for a 30-minute sales call and get paid for 6 hours of work, unless you had a month's notice. I disclosed all of this to my new DM and told him I am legally obligated to inform my employees of their rights, and to ensure they get paid what they are entitled to. Please rethink this punishment, because you will bury this store in labor costs if you enforce this. His response was,
Whatever it takes, you've been giving your directions. Anyone not on the calls when they're supposed to be will be written up.
Okay. Well, after 4 weeks of this, we got paid weekly. Nobody, including myself, got paid any of the labor surcharges we were owed. I reached out to the DM and asked him about it via text.
What? Everything you said is nonsense. Do as you're told. You get paid what the timesheet says. That's it.
Okay. Obviously, my staff is pissed for not getting paid for unapproved overtime, and for being required to come in on their day off for 30 minutes on late notice, and not getting paid what they are owed. So I sent an email to my director of sales, and I CC the owner of the company. I briefly disclose the new policy and discuss its ramifications, and attach screenshots of the text messages including discussions with my DM, including whatever it takes, and his most recent one saying, "You get paid for what the timesheet says, that's it." I basically ended it with, "I am really hoping we can resolve this soon. If anyone reports this to the Labour Commissioner's office, it will be tens of thousands in fines and penalties, plus what we owe in labour. Please advise immediately." The director responds back within a few minutes. "This does not comply with company policy. Only DM and above should be on these calls, unless specified, and you will be given advance notice. I will discuss the issue with him personally." Shortly after, I receive a call from the director asking what the deal is, and telling me to tabulate all of the overtime and penalty hours everyone is owed, and that it will be included in our weekly checks. Our labour ended up being close to 150% of what it is normally. Obviously, the staff was pumped. DM hung around for a few months after, but ultimately got let go for being a shitbag. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, number 12. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I thought I'd done more of these actually, but, well, number 12. I'm having one of those days today, just feeling up, you know those days you kind of wake up and you just feel kind of gunky for most of the day? I think when I'm done here, I might have one of my energy drinks. I've been laying off them mostly, kind of down to about one a week for the most part. It's usually my little celebration on a Friday, but I might have one to pick me up when I'm done here. I think I've got some Relentless. I think I've got an apple and kiwi one in the fridge. Yeah, I think I might have that. No actual kiwi in it. I'd know if there was. I seem to be allergic to kiwi. Very slightly allergic. No major concerns if I was to actually eat it. Just I feel a wee bit numb and tingly. Which isn't entirely unpleasant. Okay, enough rambling. I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.